Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are on the internet, as it turns out. I'm actually speaking to two audiences today, one in the Metaverse.
And one in the real verse. So I'm just going to swing this around. So say hi to everyone in the Metaverse, folks. Hey, how's it going, right? So, and likewise...
For everyone in the Metaverse, you won't be able to see, but you can. I see someone's already applauding. So in the bottom there, you can in fact react. So if you like something, definitely clap. If you don't like something, too bad I took out the thumbs down icon. So I'm going to get started now. Lisa's going to drive the slides in the Metaverse for me, and I'm going to drive the slides here. So very next slide is just our intro slide. It's a business Metaverse adoption roadmap. If that's what you're here to find out about, excellent. If you want to talk about Metaverse gaming, I think that's down the hall, alongside the Bitcoin. So my name's Terry Woloszyn. I'm actually Vice President of Sales and Marketing from Utopia VR. Today, what I'm hoping to cover, time permitting, first of all, I just mentioned this is a simulcast, and I actually invite you guys in the room on your smartphones. You can actually just click that QR code. You can actually join virtually. I wouldn't highly recommend it on the Wi-Fi here, though. It's really slow. So switch off the Wi-Fi, go to the 5G. It should work just fine. So in terms of today's agenda, what am I going to be talking about? Well, first of all, everybody has their own definition of what the Metaverse is, as do we. Hopefully, though, I can clarify it for you from a business perspective. Then I'm going to talk about what is the business impact the Metaverse is having. Basically enabling us to start thinking about what kind of impact is it having today and what kind of impacts do we need to recognize tomorrow. Then when I talk about roadmap, what I'm also giving you hopefully today is a toolkit. And these slides will be available after the presentation. What I'm going to help you first of all do is establish the business value. And in previous sessions today and yesterday, one of the things that kept coming across was, how do I establish a value for Metaverse for my CFO? And it's no different than 10 years ago when it was, how do I establish a value for social marketing? It really is the same idea. How do I ascribe value? I'm going to basically extend Gartner's own value equation, as you'll see, into something usable by you specific to Metaverse adoption. At the same time, I'm going to give you basically a solution ontology. And for those of you, I know I said ontology to one of my colleagues, goes, what's an ontology? Categorization. Think of it as a way to categorize the different solutions that people are proposing in terms of Metaverse use for business. Because with that categorization, and you'll see there's 6 dimensions by which we start categorizing this stuff, it will help you basically establish that business value, not just along a total cost of ownership or return on investment, but also in terms of the generational effects that a Metaverse can have. And we'll talk more about that. I'll also give you a business use case roadmap, both what's available today and where companies are taking Metaverse usage going forward, both cross-industry as well as in specific industries. And finally, I'm going to give you a measuring success. What's the next steps that you can be taking in terms of all of this? Okay, so let's move on. In terms of what the Metaverse is not. So let's try a little Occam's razor here. What the Metaverse is not is Web3. What the Metaverse is not is cryptocurrency. What the Metaverse is not is NFTs. But they work really well together. So if you're adopting Metaverse for business, depending on the use cases, it may involve Web3, it may involve cryptocurrency, it may involve NFTs, but it doesn't have to. The same thing is true for virtual real estate. There are a lot of Metaverse plays out there that are effectively virtual real estate plays, and I'll mention some of them as we go along. There's also the notion of you are part of a single community versus having a private intraverse, as it will, and I'm introducing that term to you, I'm sure. It is not an internet replacement. I've heard that time and time again. Guys, TCP/IP, Transport Control Protocol, Internet Protocol. Metaverse is a layer above internet. What it will be is disruptive, and it already is disruptive to other solutions and protocols that we're seeing layering on top of internet. It is not a replacement for internet. It needs the internet to live and function. And finally, what the Metaverse is not is virtual reality and augmented reality. Those are delivery rendering mechanisms that we'll talk about. But there are other ways to deliver your audience and your workers and whatnot into the metaverse. So what the metaverse is, or at least will be, it certainly is being used by video games. And you've all heard Fortnite, World of Warcraft, Axie Infinity, Roblox is one of the major players today. In the last session alone, the lawyer was discussing basically Walmart's entree into Roblox. And we're seeing those kinds of communities that are today quasi video game, but also quasi community. They're very appealing, as we'll see why. They've been appealing for the last 17 years, believe it or not, to brands in terms of getting a market reach, going after a large community that is already centralized. It's an easy putt. It's a short putt for companies to start going after customers in there. At the same time, we have metaverse platforms. So Meta is a good example. Microsoft is another one. My own company, Utopia VR, is a metaverse as a service platform. Communities, Second Life, Decentraland, and others as well, are basically metaverse communities where, for whatever reason, whether it's you've got a shared interest or there's you want to have a presence in a large community as a brand or whatever, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And finally, there are business solutions now emerging in terms of pre-built solutions for business to simply adopt and run with, as opposed to having to worry about bespoke solutions or having to develop their own. So let's talk a little bit about the internet versus metaverse. And I don't mean it as they're opposing. I'm saying in terms of the similarities, the internet is basically comprised of a series, as everyone knows, of intranets. When you're behind your corporate firewall, are you on the internet? Yeah, it's actually debatable. You're actually on an intranet behind that corporate firewall. Your machine's assigned an IP address behind that firewall, but it has address translation or some other mechanism for getting access to the rest of the resources on the internet. So the internet is really a combination of intranet segments, right? And it could be on-premise, it could be cloud. And what's interesting is this comparison is going to come back to bite us when we talk about interoperability. 30 years ago, we had interoperability. In fact, there was a whole show called Interop that some of us may remember, the gray hairs in the room, where the vendors actually had to get together, believe it or not, to make sure that their protocols could talk to the other vendors' protocols. Can I actually log into that box over there? Can I transport email? Can I transfer files and whatnot? The same thing, it's as that famous saying goes, it's deja vu all over again, where we're now seeing the same interoperability questions happening for the metaverse. So the metaverse is really going to be a composition of a series of intraverse segments, whether it's public intraverses like Decentraland and Horizon, or private intraverses, or even custom intraverses. The point is, there's no metaverses, it's a metaverse, and it's comprised of a bunch of intraverses. So that gets some of the language out of the way. So when we look at the business impact of this, though, from a business perspective, we can start taking a look at what are some of those impacts we need to worry about. Well, certainly from an IT perspective, depending on the solutions that you're adopting, like I said, Web3, blockchain, and VR/AR may not be what Metaverse is comprised of, but the solutions you're delivering as a Metaverse solution or in the Metaverse may require one or more of those technologies. They work well together. It's like, so your IT department, though, may have to worry about how am I going to manifest this? How are we going to deliver this? How are we going to manage this? From an HR perspective, a metaverse is very good. And I'm going to talk about some of these business solutions. A metaverse is an excellent distributed workforce capability. Platform to basically start expanding into a global workforce management, as well as addressing the hybrid and remote work requirements that we now see today. From a finance perspective, I might be talking about virtual real estate, real estate, where I'm now representing it virtually with tokens and whatnot. I have to worry about labor costs now if I'm working with a global workforce now virtually. Those kinds of questions are being asked by finance. Security and risk. Talk to any analyst, all the CXO whisperers like Gartner, Forrester, Bloomberg, and the like. And the first thing you're going to hear from them is, well, security might be an issue. And it is. We don't know what we don't know for the most part in terms of where we're going to need to be from a security, but also a legal risk perspective. And the last session, again, was covering some of those legal risk, facets and requirements that we're all going to have to face. It's something we need to worry about. as well as just simple things like insurance, digital asset management. Where am I going to pay my taxes? Those are all questions now that are starting to emerge as we move into a decentralized, globalized metaverse environment. Social and culturally, now we're worrying about presence, productivity, culture, and even cyberbullying. I mean, there's one of the use cases the lawyer in the last session even raised was the fact that we've now seen our first example, for example, of a sexual harassment case in the metaverse, ongoing. So those are the kinds of things that we also need to worry about. And finally, if I can read it down there, there might be some mission critical priorities, MCPs. And I'm going to talk more about that when I talk value. But just the notion of things like, how is this going to impact our carbon footprint, positively and or negatively? We'll see. So that's the business impact. So let's talk about a value assessment then. As a business, if I'm going to adopt the metaverse for business purposes, I really need to start looking at this, and this is, again, as I said, is based on the Gartner value equation, if you're familiar with it. So it starts off in the upper left-hand corner, and this is true in Gartner's value equation for any tech, and I've adopted it and adapted it for metaverse purposes. But you start off with the mission-critical priorities. So for an organization, you just have to read the annual report to say, we're worried about the carbon footprint, we're worried about a global workforce, we're worried about those aspects of a corporate, prioritization are important to be mapping your solutions back to. If you start anywhere else on that wheel of life, you run the risk of either not being able to deliver value or not being able to map that value back to the corporate requirements. So once you understand what the mission critical priorities are, you can start looking at potential solutions. So let's just use the case. I have a global workforce requirement as a mission critical priority. I have a carbon footprint requirement as a mission critical priority. What's a good use case then for addressing those using metaverse? It would be a virtual office environment. And that goes into all sorts of goodness in terms, and I will talk about that as a specific use case in a moment. But for now, that's a great value enablement, as it were. Here's a solution. Let's start looking at a virtual office as a presence to address our hybrid work requirements. When I do that, then I can look at the impacts. What are the financial impacts? Well, there are many that you're going to have to start mapping to your given situation. But if I take a look at a virtual office requirement and say, I've got a virtual office in the metaverse, terrific. I don't have to worry about all these people driving to the office every day. That's a carbon footprint impact. Oh, that's pretty cool. So I start mapping these things, the impacts, to financial and non-financial, and then start mapping them back as returns to my mission critical priorities. And so when I can complete that wheel of life to say, look, I've got this solution in the metaverse for having this virtual office, I can look at the financial and non-financial impacts to productivity, collaboration, carbon footprint, office rent, those kinds of things, mapping that back to my MPCs. That's the circle of life. What we're seeing, unfortunately, is some of the adoption of metaverse. And there's an example that I heard 2 days ago. And I don't know if it was part of a larger solution, but the example they gave was there's a metaverse solution that is teaching medical personnel how to wash their hands. And at first I thought, that's brilliant. And then I thought, wait a minute, that's really expensive if that's just the sole purpose of that solution. Something that we've been teaching medical practitioners to do by dragging them to a sink and showing them for free. As opposed to, here's a goggles, here's the $1,500 card, here's another workstation. Even if it's just one workstation per hospital, someone then has a total cost of ownership to worry about that solution. You have to make sure it's updated and upgraded. You have to make sure that everything is functioning. And then even if it's one machine, it's serial. There are good applications and bad applications. And what we're seeing with metaverse adoption by business today is people are just throwing stuff at the wall, hoping it sticks. Because again, they're not using a proper value assessment methodology. So that's the first thing I'm going to give you as part of this toolkit is adopt a value assessment methodology specific to your environment and your requirements for your organization. And you can't go wrong because you'll be able to not only assess what the potential value is and what the potential costs are, but also mapping it back to something you can have meaningful discussions with your board and your C-levels with. The second aspect to this toolkit then is an ontology. So let's take a look at the different characteristics by which we can now look at the different solutions. First of all, is it accessible by public or private or both? because that's going to have some impacts in your deployment, in your management, in your legal structure, in a number of facets. So understanding your solutions by access is important. Your usage, is this a community usage, intraverse that you're adopting? So for example, you're establishing a storefront or an office in Decentraland, or are you establishing a private metaverse? I have my own private office building, for example, in my own intraverse. Is it for commercial or non-commercial purposes? And this may have or may not have impact in terms of your utilization of it. For example, I'm going to have to cryptocurrency because I'm going to be transacting using crypto. Great. Or I might even be taking credit cards. It doesn't matter. The point is, do I have commercial and non-commercial aspects to my solution? That's obviously going to have impact on your taxation, on your reporting, on your privacy requirements and the like. Hosting-wise, am I going to have it hosted on the cloud? Am I going to be on-premise? Is it going to be some hybrid thereof? And as an adjunct to that, is it delivery? Have I got basically something that's based on a game engine like Unreal or Unity that I'm going to force my users to download software to view? Or am I going to deliver it as a software as a service model where they can use a browser or a headset, but it's just through a high level, no hosting required, no downloading required? And finally, the presentation. Am I using VR, AR? Am I using a browser? Have I got some custom client that I'm using? Do I have a combination of all three? Those are, again, aspects you need to worry about that will come back to bite you from a business perspective in terms of what are the costs to maintain it, what are the costs to deliver it, what are the costs to upgrade it, and the like. So total cost of ownership, return on investment. Those are the 6 characteristics by which we're helping our customers, for example, determine what their requirements are and then how to best, help them now anticipate that those value requirements that I mentioned earlier. So let's take a look at Second Life as an example. Now, people are like, Second Life? What? This Second Life is a brilliant example of brands going after a community that are, for all intents and purposes, a metaverse. So here is, again, the value. It's a public access. It's a community. There's commerce involved. It's cloud-based, but it's also game software with a custom presentation that needs to be downloaded. So we look at the usual use cases. Believe it or not, there's some pretty big brands that basically 17 years ago were dipping their toes into the metaverse. Now, why were they doing this? Well, like any brand, they're trying to reach a community. They're trying to sell products and or services. And so they're looking at this going, GM, for example, had Pontiac. They launched the Motorrad Island. Dell, you could actually specify and purchase a Dell computer in Second Life. I thought that 17 years ago, I'm like, this is magic. This is brilliant. I don't have to go to a website. I can go and do this online. It's really prototypical for what we're seeing now. And we think this is all brand new. No, actually, this is 17 years old. It's deja vu all over again. Coca-Cola actually had a virtual thirst Coke machine design competition, believe it or not. And I could go on. Other brands you'd recognize. Adidas, BBC had a foot race. Cisco had a presence. Harvard taught classes in Second Life. So their students would actually go into Second Life and learn remotely 17 years ago, way pre-pandemic. So those are some examples. Wells Fargo actually had a bank presence in Second Life. How cool is that? So everything old is new again. So what are some of the today's business use cases that we're actually looking at? Well, the first one, as I mentioned, is future of work. It's a virtual hybrid office. Now, what are some of the benefits to having a virtual office? Living through the pandemic, of course, we all went and used collaborative tools. There was Zoom, there was Teams, there was a number of them, file sharing and presence and whatnot. And now with the pandemic lifting and restrictions lifting, a lot of management are going, I need people back at the office. I just talked to a manager yesterday. He's going, no, I insisted everyone has to come back to the office. Why? Why is that such a necessity? Were they not productive? Well, I don't know how to measure productivity, so I need to be able to see them in this, which may be or may not be valid depending on the actual worker use case. But the reality is, a lot of the reports said that workers were actually more productive remotely than they were originally in the office. And so there's a productivity issue. There's a presence issue. There was actually a first lawsuit in Canada where somebody said, look, I've been constructively dismissed. So of course, they're in Canada, I can get compensation for that. The insurance company she worked for said, no, hang on. We're actually going to fight this because in reality, no pun intended. Actually, it was intended. In reality, basically stole time from us. So has anyone heard the term stolen time as far as workers are concerned? Get used to it. Okay, one, get used to it. Anyone in the metaverse heard that? You can raise your hand or clap. So depending on the use case, like I said, there's a requirement to view some of the workers, and in the most case, productivity, presence becomes an important factor. So in the metaverse, now you can actually establish a presence. And so walking up to someone in the metaverse and saying, hey, Terry, I need to talk to you. Yeah, sure, let's go. And we can walk into a virtual conference room, we can project screens, we can write on whiteboards. Believe it or not, Utopia VR, during the pandemic, we didn't use Zoom once. We met in our own offices. We all established a presence in our virtual offices. We all knew when we were there. More importantly, we all knew when we were not there. And it almost restores an aspect to work and addresses that stolen time problem. If I'm at my desk, I'm available to work. I'm not at my desk, I'm not working. It's just like a real office. And so reducing the Zoom fatigue as well can be terrific. We call it the Brady Bunch interface, right? There's a bunch of collaborative products and solutions that basically have it all there. But can you really stand, staring at someone? You have to worry about how you're looking, and the cat walking behind you and everything else, versus having an avatar in the metaverse, which you can interact with in real time. So we're also seeing, and I've got some of these in terms of enabling faster learning. The last presentation had the example of Accenture. They did a brilliant job of onboarding and training using basically meta headsets. Now, if you talk to anyone at Accenture, they'll say that was great during the onboarding and training, and then it went on a shelf for the rest of their tenure at Accenture. Because the problem we're seeing with AR and VR, as an example, is it's hard to integrate into a real world workflow where you're doing email, you're doing presentations, etc. We're seeing great demand for this, both from a corporate perspective, but also as a solution perspective. So private tutoring, training organizations and whatnot are coming to us looking for these kinds of solutions that are scalable and cost effective, where I need to do one-on-one, or I need to do M-to-N cardinality of teachers to students. Especially depending on who you're teaching, they love this, the kids. They're used to this interface. They're used to the WASD. They're used to the mouse. They're used to the avatars. They're grabbing onto this and going, this is the way I want to learn. There's no more falling asleep. There's no more boredom. There's no more, you're basically, and from a corporate perspective, now you're able to foster team building globally. You're also being able to offer, guys, take pictures. I invite it. I'm going to give you the slides afterwards as well. So basically, it's more engaging. As I said, you can blend real and virtual. It's onboarding reimagined now, but most importantly, it's global team building. And that's why Accenture did it too. It's consistent and it's global. I can now have team members globally that I now get to know what their job function is. I'm understanding the corporate culture as well, that I can now get consistent globally. So onboarding and training is an important use case. Digital marketing experiences. We're living this one today.
I'm actually using Utopia VR's own digital marketing experience solution by simulcasting this into our Metaverse solution into the auditorium. So here we've got an ability now to mix real and virtual products, real and virtual presence, as it were, and it's great for B2B, B2C, B2B2C, multi-level marketing, whatever the case may be, whether it's real or DeFi transactions, decentralized finance.
So in terms of this, though, again, the slide is incorrect there on the onboarding and training. Anyway, so the digital marketing experiences, again, this is an example where virtual trade shows are becoming the norm. And we're going to see the digital twinning of trade shows. There are trade shows coming up this year where there will be virtual components and physical components, so that you can go and have a physical presence, but you can also then go and have a virtual experience from the vendors on the show floor, as an example, or meet with them virtually at any time. Those kinds of things. So let's talk about some industry-specific use cases as well. Certainly, I mentioned education, where this is becoming really great from a remote tutoring perspective. There are a lot of tutoring companies out there. They're seeing an ability to expand their market presence now by going into geographies where it's just not practical or physical for them to have a physical presence. But they can offer the same tutoring solutions to those environments as long as they have internet. So it's a hybrid and a remote classroom. It's also great for situations where you might want to have field trips. So we have one organization, for example, that says, look, wouldn't it be great? And here's a great use case. Wouldn't it be great? I've got a situation where my students literally walk 2 hours to school. The last thing I can do is drag them to the Louvre. It's not going to happen on another continent. But what if you could bring them to the Louvre? What if you could have them stand in front of the Mona Lisa and ask, what am I looking at? That kind of contextual integration with a chat GPT or generative AI is possible today. So that you can literally have a virtual tour guide guiding your students on a virtual field trip of basically anything on Earth and give them the interactive responses that they personally are looking for in terms of what am I looking at? Well, this was painted in, whatever, 1609 by, and off you go. That's what's coming in terms of education. So we're basically being able to use this technology today as far as metaverse and AI combined. It's like chocolate and peanut butter. Kids are going to be that much more educated globally, being able to now understand other cultures by experiencing them, regardless of where they are on the planet. Healthcare. We're seeing healthcare uses today. I love the third one. This was my favorite, and this is real world today.
Anyone here have a fear of spiders? Oh, liars, come on. Who has a fear of spiders? There you go, thank you. Okay, they're treating arachnophobia, believe it or not, by putting people into virtual rooms full of spiders. It's a safe environment. I know it sounds hard, you wouldn't believe it, but they're actually seeing a significant, a statistically significant increase in, I don't know if you want to call it cures, but treatment for this.
The same thing for fear of heights. Let's just put you on the top of the CN Tower and have you look over the edge virtually. They can do that. And they're actually experiencing that and finding success in this.
Facilities walkthroughs. Hospitals today are digital twinning their hallways. If you've ever had any sort of procedure that you have to go into a large hospital for, follow the lines. Good luck if you're colorblind. But with a virtual environment, you can actually walk the halls of the hospital and get to where you're going on time.
And certainly we're seeing training. And this is where VR AR is wonderful. Here, let's practice open heart surgery in situations you don't actually have access to a heart. Travel and tourism, we're already seeing cases of try before you fly. Actually go experience some of the realms, the worlds, the services and whatnot of where you'd like to vacation. Virtual tours, as I mentioned, going into specific things like the Louvre and whatnot.
Anyone even remember, you actually had a Louvre tour, believe it or not, built into the Nintendo DS 15 years ago. Bet you didn't know that. But it's there. So
those kinds of things, everything old is new again. Occupational safety, you've probably heard of these, where I can basically train firefighters in situations where they're not exposed to real flames, but they're pulling virtual hose. They're understanding how do I need to respond and behave. Safety training in terms of working with dangerous equipment in a safe environment. Those kinds of things. So how do we measure success? Well, certainly, like I said, we complete the cycle. So we map those solutions to your mission critical priorities. We map the benefits to the solutions. We map the impact on the MCPs to the benefits. And finally, we can start measuring those impacts so that the next year's annual report, you can say, we actually reduced our carbon footprint by 30% by adopting a virtual office space. Mileage may vary. By adopting a virtual office space solution for our global workforce. That's how you sell the CXOs, folks. That's how you get business to buy into this. So next steps, certainly you select a low-risk starting point, and that's going to depend on you. But now you have an ontology to work with. Now you have a costing value analysis to work with to say, is this the right starting point for us? It's not just low risk. It's not just TCO. It's not just ROI. It's all of what I already gave you in terms of alignment to the mission critical priorities. Instrument those solutions. Get feedback from your users. Good example again, being able to instrument a virtual office to see who's actually in the office. How are they using it? How long have they been using it? Now those guys have missed out. I've got, correct me if I'm wrong, Eric, I got 10 minutes left. Haha, we're gonna do a demo.
If this works, I will be stunned. Okay, guys, I need someone in the metaverse to move that screen for me, please, onto the big screen so that everyone in the metaverse can see it. So this is, believe it or not, my office. So I'm going to join my room, and I'm going to enter my room, and I can now simply walk around it, as you can see, and I can do this with or without VR goggles if I want to. My wife basically put on a cell phone into Google Cardboard. We walked into my office. I swear to goodness, we were looking under the table for gum. It looks that good. I stood on the back of one of our virtual yachts, and my diver body said, hey, I'm used to standing on the back of a dive boat. This is not what it feels like, and I threw up. So there are some downsides to using VR AR goggles, which people experience. But here it is on a browser. But this is the interesting part. Here I can basically sit down at my desk. And here you can see I've got a desktop login. What happens with the desktop login? I'm going to click it, and notice it opens a second tab. And in this case, I'm accessing a virtual desktop that's only accessible through my virtual office. So here I can log in. And I'm not going to ever save this. And now I can log into, in this case, my Windows box. And guess what? I've now logged into my virtual desktop. So during the pandemic, a lot of organizations said, I'm not shipping workstations home. I don't want you to use your own equipment. We're going to create a virtual desktop, Windows desktops for you. And they were using that, and here we are now saying, let's take that one step further. It's not just about meetings. It's not just about collaboration. It's about working. I'm sitting at my desk, accessing my virtual workstation in another tab. So now I've got a global workforce that is able to access corporate resources through their browser exclusively, as well as collaborate through their browser exclusively, working together, collaborating. How cool is that? Oh, come on. How cool is that? Okay, thank you.
All right, Lisa, I've got no questions in real life. What have we got here in terms of virtual questions? If you want to put them in the chat.
For us, the biggest one we have is how do I secure a virtual office space? And I also
so the biggest question is, how do we secure a virtual office space? And that's an excellent question. And again, it depends on how you're delivering it. So if you're delivering it as a bespoke solution, certainly that's something that you can build security in. In our case, for example, since we are browser-based, multi-factor authentication is certainly viable. So integrating in with your LDAP, integrating in with Duo, Authenticator, whatever you'd like. But also, we're introducing a new paradigm for security because, as you noticed, the only way to get to my virtual desktop was in my virtual office. So now we're back to the notion of locking virtual assets, like my virtual office, up in order to protect my virtual desktop, my virtual workstation. This is interesting because now I no longer have to worry about RDP and VPNs and all the ransomware that goes along associated with those two top ransomware vectors, I might add. So we're adding a whole new paradigm, like I said. The Metaverse is introducing a whole new paradigm for security.
Any questions locally again? Yeah, go ahead. You asked one already, so I'm going to ask the gentleman first. Okay.
Yeah, in the use cases where companies offer certain products to the customers, right?
Yes.
As an enterprise, they need to ensure the data is also protected from
Yes.
a customer standpoint.
Absolutely.
Do you see for those kind of use cases to provide metaverse experience for those customers, both public and private metaverses need to coexist and the data needs to travel and the experience need to travel?
That's an excellent question. So really your question is about how do and I mentioned it earlier, right? I talked about interoperability.
Yep.
That's an excellent point. In the market that we're talking about today, it really is nascent. Interoperability today is very static. So for example, we leverage Ready Player Me to generate avatars, as do a lot of other public available metaverses and platforms. So at least I can transfer my look, as it were. I can't today transfer my agency, per se. So what experience I've garnered in one metaverse, can that translate even to another metaverse instance? Or I should say introverse, another aspect, another area of the metaverse, another introverse. That's challenging today. But in terms of digital assets, certainly this is where we look at basically, are you on-chain or off-chain? Is it a private chain? Is it a public chain? So blockchain is going to become very important in terms of being able to both establish identity across introverses in the metaverse, but also then transporting and moving goods from one introverse to another. And whether it's a platform like a SaaS platform like us, or whether it's a bespoke solution based on Unity, Unreal, or Unity, or others, that's something that needs to be addressed by yourself or the solution provider. Those standards are emerging, and I recommend go talk to that man right there in the corner, because he's part of those standards bodies that are dictating all of. Well, I shouldn't say dictating. That's a bad word, right? Defining. I love it.
At some point, I think the avatars could be an NFT, which could be used as an ID, so that it could be accessible.
Absolutely, and which goes on a chain, which then gets transportable, and those are all standards that are in the making. Absolutely. Anyway, yeah. So I think I'm basically timing out here. I want to thank everyone for attending. Certainly meeting after the conference. So anytime next week and beyond, just use that link into Calendly, book some time with me. I'm happy to show you around and chat and even introduce you to some of my colleagues. My name is Terry Woloszyn, Utopia VR. I want to thank you very much.